Hey, it's Joe Farrow with Geek Toolkit, and I built this pedestal arcade cabinet. Now, I had the control panel donated to me, but I stuffed an entire PC into it. In this episode, we're going to talk about how I put this together. We're going to show you the PC inside, and then I'll talk about this pedestal that I picked up. But the other thing I want to go into this video, because I want more of an educational thing, is I want to talk about what is a pedestal arcade. I'll talk about other arcade cabinets. So if you're not as familiar with arcade cabinets or trying to learn, or if you just want to get some inspiration, I'm going to go through a bunch of different arcade cabinets and a bunch of different pedestal builds. The other thing we're going to do in this video, the second half of it, is going to be all about, we're going to mock build up pedestal arcades, and then we'll rate them against each other. And the whole point of this is to teach you about trade-offs between getting like your own encoder or using a Raspberry Pi, using SoundWah buttons versus using like a Pandoras Box. We'll talk about all of those options, what they mean, and what the benefits of each are. And it's all going to start right now. Okay, the first thing is, let me break down what a pedestal arcade cabinet is. A pedestal arcade is when you have the controls on a pedestal. It's typically separate from the screen. It's very basic. Now I say typically because, like everything, there's always exceptions. But in this case, that's exactly what I have here. I have this pedestal that I got off Amazon, and then I have a control panel that's been placed on top of it. Okay, now that we know what a pedestal is, let's talk about other arcade cabinets so we can compare and understand the benefits of a pedestal arcade. The first one we're going to talk about is just a general arcade cabinet. This is called an upright cabinet or a full-size cabinet, and this is what you normally see. This is called a cocktail cabinet, and typically for two-player games, you have somebody sitting at either end and the screen flips back and forth. This is a bar top and a wall mount cabinet. These are modern cabinets that are great for home use. And then you've got your specialty cabinets like cockpit cabinets, which are great for driving and flying games. These are called mini cabinets or cabaret cabinets. They're typically for kids. And then in Japan, you've got sit-down cabinets. These are candy cabs. And then you've got your Violix cabinets that are styled like this. These are called three-quarter cabinets. These have been made popular by Arcade1Up. They are typically the same as an upright cabinet. They're just a smaller scale. They actually make a cocktail and now a pinball three-quarter cabinet as well. Now, the thing about a pedestal arcade, though, is you can see you can have the biggest monitor size available of all these cabinets. The other thing is you have a lot of storage and you have a lot of ability to have people gather around it and watch the gameplay. So it's a great spectator thing. This is my setup, and the thing I like about this is I can sit on the couch and watch movies or TV shows, so my television becomes available not only as a big screen gaming setup, but also a movie and video setup. I can also sit down and play console games with it. So now that we've done that, let's talk about what's inside. What I have in this build right here is a 3rd generation i5 Intel chip with an NVIDIA GTX 960. What that does for me is it gives me a very powerful PC gaming system. I can run Steam and Epic Games on here, and I do. This is actually Steam running in the background. Okay, we're going to take a quick tour of this. Here's the top, and I'm going to flip this up. Oh, it's a bit heavy. And there's the power supply. Just got the cables, that and the network running out. There's the motherboard. There's a Noctua low profile fan. That was needed because when you look up here, that giant black square is the trackball. So see, that's how that maps. It comes through, and it's very low to have a full-size trackball, so I had to have a very low profile fan to fit this under. Then you've got a PCIe extension, and then the video card. Now the video card's fans are actually facing down, so it's propped up, and then I've got a fan on top of it to keep it cool, but it's been working really well. Over there, you've got to see the Samsung SSD up against the wall. And then there's a fan that's doing most of the work right now, outside of this one. Everything thermally is kept very cool. I'll take a quick tour of this. This was donated to me, so all of this wiring was already done. They soldered all the wires. This is the iPac 4. All of the wires run to this. And then there's a USB out. That white cable comes back around, goes into the motherboard. I've got some 90-degree add-ons there to get that to fit a little bit better. The HDMI and a USB go out to that port right there, and that provides me a USB and HDMI out in the back. And then I have an extra auxiliary hole in case I need to run another cable. You can see the fans are offset slightly. That's because the controls all come down a bit. And so to get everything to fit, I had to wiggle it around. If I had to do it again, I would have set the fans in first before I drilled the holes, instead of trying to center the holes and then get the fans to work out. It's not super pretty inside, but it works, and none of the wires are hitting fans right now. One of the biggest challenges I had, besides the height, is getting everything to stay cool. So I actually added 4 fan ports. I ended up only needing 2 of them right now, but then I did custom fan covers on this. And the cool thing about that is I did a live stream showing how I designed those, so that if you want to do custom fan covers that are for an arcade setup, it will show you how to do that. Going with the PC, the big thing for me was I have a lot of flexibility. I have a great Steam library thanks to Humble Bundles and Epic. Their app seems to give me a free game every time I log in, it feels like. So being able to play them on here was really nice. The other nice thing about this setup is it's on a pedestal that was very inexpensive. Found on Amazon. It was actually a TV pedestal, but it works great for this. Pedestal had plenty of storage for controllers, keyboards, mice, my Amazon Fire TV, which runs a lot of my TV stuff, and also I have an Xbox One and a 360 down there, and I've got room to expand. So that's what I have running here. Nice inexpensive pedestal, donated cabinet, and a PC that's just powerful enough to do all of the things I want to do. I'm going to show you how to build a Pedestal Arcade, and the way I'm going to do it is we're going to go through about 5 different builds. We'll pick out the controls, the pedestal, and everything, and then what we're going to do is we're going to rate them. So rating them, we'll rate them on these things here, you know, price, skill level. What do you have to know to do it? Do you have to know woodworking, electronics? We'll talk about complexity. Complexity will be how hard are they to maintain and manage. We'll talk about quality of like the emulation and the buttons and so on. Flexibility will be around like, can you run a media center on it? Can you run PC games and so on? And then style, when somebody walks in the room, what's their wow factor? The first build we're going to talk about is what's called the Pandoras Box. This is a gray, let's see, how do you describe this? Let's just call it a gray market thing out of Asia. But these are the control panel versions. There's different versions. These actually have the control buttons, the joysticks and everything. They have a computer inside of them. You can see this video here is showing this guy using it. They have the front end, the software is all set up. These are basically, you buy them and you have thousands of games. Okay. The downside of it is sometimes some of those games are 12 different versions of the same game. Some of them, the games don't work that well. Sometimes the sound skips, but that is what they are. So if you were to buy one of these, you would read the reviews very carefully and know what you're getting into. That being said, I wanted to describe a solution where you could do a pedestal arcade and not have to actually do any woodworking or anything crazy. And then we'll work our way up to there. So don't worry, we'll get there. This is the pedestal that I would put that on. This is the same one I purchased just to keep things. This is the budget conscious, no skill. I just want to buy it and play games thing. This is a $90 pedestal. It gives you a lot of storage and options there. Okay, so let's go through and rate this one. Price-wise, you can see the prices here. $150, $160. The pedestal was about $100. There's not a lot going on in price here. Skill level, none. I mean, you basically plug in power and video and you go. The complexity here, there's no complexity really. Quality, okay, now we talk trade-offs. The quality of the controls is not going to be as good as some of the other things we'll talk about. The emulation performance, like I said, can be glitchy. Basically, the games they come with, they'll work with. Some of them let you add some games. Speaking of, let's talk about flexibility. You're going to have the games that they come with. Some let you add games, most don't. You typically cannot add any other types of controllers to these, so you're not going to be able to add a spinner or a trackball, and there's no software abilities to upgrade. Style, they have artwork on them. I don't know, I'm kind of partial to this. Look, I think this thing looks really cool, but if somebody walk in your room, they're not going to be blown away. This will make more sense when we talk about the later systems. Here's another way to go. This is actually a Pandoras Box pedestal. When I was doing research on this, I found this. I was like, hey, the next build, we're going to go a different way. We're going to actually go with a console. In my case, in this fantasy world where I'm building this setup, I'm going to go with an Xbox 360 because I personally have a bunch of arcade games on it. And I'm going to get 2 joysticks for it from brands like Kodi or Quamba makes some good stuff. Mad Catz makes some good stuff. So basically one of these high-end arcade sticks. And I paired that with a pedestal off of Etsy. It would look probably something like this. So imagine 2 arcade sticks on this, and then I paint it or get some of the artwork that's available. That's our second build. Oh, and we have a console, so an Xbox 360 or whatever. And we go through and we buy a bunch of games. So I actually own a bunch of these, but you buy a bunch of games, especially these collections like Midway Arcade Origins that have a bunch of games in them. Now we've got that set up. Let's talk about that setup and what that involves. So price-wise, we went way up. Not only are the arcade sticks, the good ones, like $150 each, but we had to buy our own games now. Also, we had to factor in the amount of an old console. Skill level, pretty easy. Plug in the console. Maybe I'm going to paint the wood, so there's some woodworking involved as far as painting, but really no big deal here. Complexity, it's a console. It's going to be as easy a setup as a console. Quality, okay. Now, we took a jump in price, but our quality jumps way up here. One thing I forgot to mention about the Pandora boxes, they only run at 720p. So we immediately, on my Xbox 360, I go to 1080. You've got the ability to go with any console you want, and you're probably going to end up at 1080 or even 4K if you get a brand new one. So you can jump up on quality here. The other thing is the emulation quality. Because I'm getting games that are made for the console, they're going to run really well. Game flexibility is incredible because now I can play all of the console games as well. I can sit back with a wireless controller and play them. I can use sometimes you can use them as media centers. I can't add spinners or joysticks really as far as like, a Tron stick or, a trackball, anything like that to it. So my flexibility, I'll put it in the middle. Style wise, if I added artwork or finished off this wood, I think I can make that look okay. One other thing about flexibility and quality is if I'm playing a game that's made for a console that's been ported, it's probably going to be really cool because typically they'll do enhanced graphics, online multiplayer, leaderboards, there's achievements or trophies. Like there's a lot of stuff they add on. Sometimes they have like behind the scenes videos and stuff like that or manuals. So I really appreciate all that stuff. And I think that's really cool. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Raspberry Pis. These are very popular for pedestal setups. As a matter of fact, most of the ones I researched when I was working on this video, I kept hitting this. And I put Raspberry Pis in my arcade one up. They do great for emulation. They're very, very flexible, and they allow you to do things like Media Center, like Kodi and such. So we're going to put a Raspberry Pi in this build, and we're going to match it up with this thing called a tank stick. The tank stick I'm mentioning because I think you should know about it if you do anything with emulation or arcade stuff. Just the X-Arcade tank stick has been around for a long time. It's very popular. As a matter of fact, if we go back to that Etsy ad that I had, you can see they even show a picture with it on there. So we're going to match up that tank stick, and we're going to put it on something from Rec Room Masters. This pedestal right here has a door that opens up in the back for storage. I actually own one of these things. You see, you can set it separate from your screen, so you have a true pedestal. It looks a little different, but it's got a lot of storage underneath. You can see you can put your consoles and everything in there. They have 2 360s in there for some reason, and only got Mac Mini. I don't know why. And then this is the insert for the X-Arcade. Remember, I was telling you that that's popular. A lot of companies will actually have specific cutouts for it. So this is kind of what we would be looking at here. Rating that setup price-wise, we're doing, we keep jumping up in price, but that's going to be how it is. Complexity and skill level did go up because we switched to a Raspberry Pi. So you're going to have to know how to set that up and the front ends. But when we get to quality, you've got a 1080p output. You've got the ability to make your front end look how you want it to look. Emulation quality is going to be, it's going to be okay. I'm going to put it in the medium category because when you compare it to a PC, it just doesn't compare. For what it is, it does really, really well. And the control quality, well, we're on the X-Arcade tank stick. These things have been around for a long time, for a while. The control quality is going to be really solid, and we've added in a trackball. Flexibility, the Raspberry Pis in general, when we talk about them, they are going to be able to run all of the games that they are emulating. They are also able to run Steam games remotely. If you have another PC that has Steam in the network, there's ways to do that. And basically, there's a Steam client for it. And then finally, this will allow you to run Kodi, which is a media center, and it runs it fairly well. I've run it on a Pi 3 and stream 1080p movies. They work really well. So you've added quite a bit of flexibility by adding a Raspberry Pi. Cost-wise, the Raspberry Pi is really low, but we made that up with this setup here is about $400 or $500. It's hard to get a hold of, but if you do, that with the tank stick of being $200, I think our price ended up higher overall. The other thing about a Raspberry Pi, we talked about them as a $35 computer, but really when you add all this stuff up, you're more at about $70 to $80 when you add a power supply, micro SD card, and so on. Style-wise, we didn't really make it too fancy. The X Arcade doesn't really have any fancy artwork on top. Okay, next build. The next build, we're gonna go up to one of these. This is more of a really slick looking, honestly, pedestal cabinet. This one has a diamond plate. We can get some T-molding, which is the liner that normally goes inside of here. And this one actually has art kits that are available. I think they're about $200. So we can pick out some artwork and make this look really fancy, the diamond plate. But we'll stay with the Raspberry Pi, but we're gonna do our own button setup now. And this button setup has what's called an encoder. It has the wire harnesses for you. The encoder is what transfers the button presses into keyboard or joystick presses. And so we'll talk about encoders more in a bit. The encoder is an important thing to understand. This one will emulate a joystick. So any game that a joystick can play, this thing will be able to do. Let's go through and rate it. Price-wise, we bumped up again. Skill level, a bit harder because now we're actually doing some electronics. We're going to wire this in. Now, of the electronics that we'll talk about, this is some of the simplest. Basically, each one of these wires is a button, and it goes to the two wires on the button here. And everything came in this package, so it's pretty straightforward. Complexity, we talked about that. Quality is going to be probably a little bit lower than Tank Stick based on the button quality of the switches that you get. As far as emulator quality, it's Raspberry Pi still, so we're still there. Flexibility, same Raspberry Pi. Style-wise, we would look a lot sharper, I think, with some vinyl wraps, but we're going to get even better. Okay, next build. We're going to move to a PC. We're going to throw a PC in a full-size cabinet like this. This is $500. At the base, there is a ton of options and mods that we can do to this. We can add a 4-way joystick. So if you see a control panel like this with a second joystick up here, this is a 4-way joystick. It only goes 4 directions. These are 8-way joysticks. That's why you have this up here. This is great for Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. It just controls a lot better. We've also got a trackball, and you can see the artwork. When we do a full wrap on this, you can really make this shine. The red stuff here, this is your T-molding again. And you just see that this is going to be something when somebody walks in the door, they're going to go, wow. This is actually matched up with lit buttons and so on. Price-wise, we've jumped up quite a bit. This isn't just $4.99. When you start adding some of these options, you'll see the fanciness of this. We can add trackballs and LCDs, but we're also throwing in a PC. This is a 4th gen i5. I talked a little bit about my 3rd gen i5. 4th gen, they got a bit better graphics, so I just tried to find an inexpensive computer that had a 4th gen there. If you search for i5 refurbished, you'll end up with something. Price-wise went up, skill level went up quite a bit because now you're dealing with Windows and operating system. You're gonna have to configure your front ends, which is gonna be a bit more complex. The complexity is a bit higher. The quality is way higher. When we talk about the performance of this and the emulation quality, it's gonna go way up, because you're just running out a full i5 is leagues ahead of running a Raspberry Pi on the ARM chips that they're running on, even on a Raspberry Pi 4. So your emulation quality goes way up. You could probably look at like PS3 emulation and other emulation that you normally would never touch. Flexibility, again, you're going to be able to run Kodi, a full media center. Your browsers are going to run quite a bit better on this computer. And your game library just exploded because you can also go into retro PC gaming. You've got Steam games, Uplay, Epic. I mean, there's so many. There's like everything has a store now. Style-wise, we went way up in style too. You know, this is the trade-off game. We kept our skills low as far as we did a little bit of electronics, but we didn't do any woodworking. We still got a really cool cabinet at the end of it, but boy, we paid for it. This is Mainroom Solutions. This is the same people that did that last one. This is an alternative. This is where you'd buy just a control panel and they would do the woodworking for you. You could throw this back on something like this here. What that would do for you is get you another way to get a really high quality control panel with good artwork. So I'm going to pivot now. We'll do one more build. I just want to talk about a couple other things. This website right here is called mainroom.com, and their UI is really cool because when you select things, it does a live view here. So if like this 4-player joystick, I want it to be yellow, I select yellow and it does it live here. I can select these buttons and change that button to yellow. So I can really get a view of my customization. Now the price here, this is $749 for this part. That doesn't include the pedestal, another $300. That sounds really high, but honestly, when you look at full setups that are really professionally done, that are already wired up for you, that's about where you end up. So this jumps the price up in exchange for a skill level where you don't have to do your own wiring. And you get some nice buttons and such from these. So what does Ultra look like? It looks like the person that throws all of their woodworking skills, they have the electronic skills, they either purchase the artwork or do that as well, and then they've got the operating system and configuration skills to do a custom front end with maybe dual monitors, LED blinky setup, and light up joysticks, basically tricking it out to the max. That's what Ultra would look like to me. This is a slide that you can pause so that way you can see all of the stuff we've talked about side by side. Now keep in mind, these were just mock-up builds. Of course, you can totally mix and match things. You can put a PC into, the first pedestal that I showed you. You can put a Raspberry Pi into a super tricked out control panel. So really keep in mind, these are just guidelines to inspire you. They're definitely not builds that I would necessarily choose, but it shows you the trade-offs of the decisions you're making. And that was the point of this whole video. Okay, now I keep talking about button quality. Let's go to the next level of button quality. Let's go to like the top tier. So I'm going to stop talking about builds. I'm just going to talk about some websites you should know about so that you can really build the best thing that you could ever want to build. First site you should know about is Ultimark. Ultimark makes arcade encode. Well, they make arcade parts throughout, but they make some of the best stuff. Their encoders, like the iPac 4, that's what I'm running. That is a 4-player keyboard encoder. That means that any of the button presses go in, it gets output as a keyboard. They also have, I think the iPac Ultimate IO. This thing here has an LED power supply on it. So if you're doing lit buttons, and I'll show you that in a second. If you're doing lit buttons on a PC or with a setup like this, you can actually individually light up those buttons, which is crazy. If you have RGB buttons, you can actually light the buttons up different colors. So something like this, iPac Ultimate IO, this is going to do 60 controls. It's not just necessarily buttons. A joystick counts as 4, right? You've got up, down, left, right. Even on an 8-way, it's like that. So you've got 60 controls you can put into this. You can wire the LEDs in, and you can just go nuts. So Ultimark is a site to browse when you get into the really high-end stuff. Also, if you're going to do your own buttons and you want your own encoders, then this is a place to go to get that stuff. Akishop Customs, I discovered this site's really cool. They sell this PS360 Plus. Now, this is if you are a hardcore console gamer, say you have a Dreamcast or a Saturn, which has some amazing Japanese arcade imports that are very unique to those, and you want to play them on the console, but you also want to have arcade buttons hooked to it. This is the encoder that will take you from an arcade button and joystick down to like a Saturn or a Dreamcast. So Akishop Customs PS360 Plus. The other thing that you're going to want is the console cables to match it up. They match up to an original Xbox, PS2, Saturn, Dreamcast. Like the list is crazy. Arcade Shock is a website you should know about. They also have a thing called a retro board. If you want to build a pedestal arcade and you want to hook it to a NES or something way back when, let's see if I can find the original Xbox, Saturn, and Dreamcast, like the other one, or a Super NES. If you want to make an arcade setup that works with Super NES, then this is the encoder board that you would get. Universal modding kit from Arcade Shock. Arcade Shock also has a bunch of other amazing stuff on their site as far as buttons and so on. Like let's take a look at their store. You can see they've got the Horian, the Quanba sticks. They've got the mod sticks and gates. If you want to change like the octagonal gates that I talked about in the other video, they've got that stuff there. So very cool website to know about. Pedestal Arcade Shop. This site's one I love this site because every time I buy a Japanese joystick and I'm trying to fit it in an American joystick port, they sell the adapter plate. They also have, we talk about like high quality buttons. This is a view of some of the button selection they have. And these buttons here where you see the black center, this is called an eclipse button. And let me see, I think I have a picture of what this looks like. Yeah, so this is what an eclipse button looks like. If you hear about eclipse buttons or people talking about that term, it's basically the middle is blacked out, the outside's lit. So when I talk about lit buttons, it doesn't mean necessarily the whole thing. And they sell some really high quality eclipse buttons out there. So that's pretty cool. These buttons here, this is Focus Attack. They sell some really good stuff. Look at the depth of the button between the button and the piece here. You would have to have a very thin plate. At this point, if you're doing your own woodworking and you're adding buttons to it, or some of the other ones that you saw, the pre-cut out woods, these are probably not going to work with those, and they won't work with yours unless you cut it designed to put these buttons in. A lot of the really high-end buttons or the Sanwa and Sumitsu buttons have this really shallow piece here. This is Suzhou Hap. This is another site you should know about. This is going to sell the American concave buttons. They also have a ton of arcade stuff in general. This is another one that has all sorts of craziness. It's just fun to browse sometimes. But they you can see the depth here, right? Like this is what a lot of those MDF, the 3/4 inch MDFs are expecting. So be aware of that when you're picking your buttons out, and be aware that Sujo App's a great resource. I talked about Kodi, and if you haven't seen Kodi, Kodi is a media center front end, is what it's talked to us. It has plugins for doing streaming media. It can tie into Plex. If you have Plex, Plex is a offshoot of Kodi. This is what it looks like. And so on the Raspberry Pi and the PC versions, you can install Kodi on it. And that's what I mean when I talk about like having a front end, right? If you're browsing your movie selection and your movie selection looks like this, it's really beautiful. You're sitting across the room. So it gives that setup. You already have a computer powering it. You have a big screen TV. You might as well have a good media experience as well. So lastly, I'm going to play this video in the background while I talk about it. As I close this out here, my setup is a PC with an iPad 4 emulating keyboards. And then I'm running what's called Big Box. And this video is actually the Big Box front end. The Big Box front end, I paid, I think, $30 when I bought it. It's up to like $70 for the lifetime license now. But it makes things very, very easy for me. And so I'm not spending a bunch of time editing XML files to make things happen. If you look at Hyperspin, it's another front end really popular for PCs. There's also a Trek mode. There's actually something called Batacero, which is a Linux boot drive. I mean, I can do an entire other video on front ends, but really the thing to know is I just wanted to say this is what I used in my setup, and I've been really happy with it. It has, as you can see, a ton of different looks to it. So, okay, thank you for watching. This is probably my longest video I've ever made. I've cut 10 minutes off of it by doing it 3 times in a row, but it's still really long. That being said, I hoped to get you all the info that you would need and understand all of the trade-offs you would make in picking different setups up from each other. Thank you for watching. Thanks for the support. I wanted to have a fun video and do some video game stuff before I did my home automation stuff again, or whatever my next project is. I think actually I've got to work on my Dynaframes and get those up and running. So I'll be working on that next. If you want to see more about that, or if you have any questions, subscribe, comment below, and I read every comment. I try to answer any questions that ever come. Thanks for watching. I'm Joe Farrow with Geek Toolkit. Until next time.